Hi, I'm Laura,
Hi, I'm Deanne.
I am Philippe. Hi.
and welcome to our Lymond book club. We are reading Pawn and Frankincense by Dorothy Dunnett, and this time around we're reading chapters 7, 8, and 9. We will lead our discussion. Any initial thoughts you guys want to share first?
So the more we get into this book is high adventure. It's action, 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 which I'm loving. Don't get me wrong. There doesn't seem to be as much sort of character development and sort of like these lovely, waitful discussions that we've had so much fun picking apart in the past three books, which is not to say I'm not enjoying it, because I am. It's just sort of a different feel. Like this specific book in the series almost feels like a different genre from what Dunnett has been writing before, and I'm loving it. So
Yeah, I agree with that. I was just saying before we turned the camera on that like these three chapters were just super plot driven. Like there's just a lot that happens, and they go here and they do this and they go there and do that, and that's not a complaint. I'm enjoying what they're doing, and I'm enjoying the story as it's unfolding. But I agree. There's not as many like sort of deep character sections where we can kind of unpick all these like super tiny details throughout the conversation. Although there are definitely some things I underlined. So I think we do get glimpses of who people are and how they relate to each other as we go through all of this plot. So it'll be fun to look at these three chapters.
and I do think we'll be getting some of those sort of conversations and moments coming up. So
yeah. So Laura, thoughts?
I sort of agree and I sort of disagree. Having spent a lot of time on the Lymond, the old Yahoo mailing list that got moved to whatever the new thing is, there's a ton of discussion about this book and about these chapters, because there's a lot of trying to figure out some of the subtle things that are going on through here, that at this point are very subtle, but we will talk about them in chapter 9, I think. And I think also there's some really interesting thematic stuff going on here, and some really beautiful, creepy, like beautiful horror imagery in this book that we haven't gotten from Dunnett before. It kind of reminds me of the show Hannibal, the like super beautiful, super horrifying images of death, the silk moths dying, and like poison gas with Jarrett. Like there's some real horror, and of course the 2-year-old child prostitution stuff, like just horror in this book that I think is fascinating, and it certainly people talk a lot about what's going on here.
Yeah, I agree. I have some thoughts on when we get to the child thing.
Oh.
A theory. Dee has another theory.
oh.
Okay, so let's just start off. So we're in chapter 7, and this is I do not know how to pronounce the O with the little accent thing over it. Is it Bonnet? Bone? No clue.
I was thinking Bonnet, but then that would be an accent over the E, so that can't be right. But apparently I mispronounce things a lot, especially.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing all of it. And Monastir, so Bon and Monastir, gonna go with that. They sort of put in to this place, Bonnet, and there's this bit about the ocean that we'll talk about, and kind of ruins of Rome. And then Jarrett and Salablanca look at this sort of swath of children that are brought to them in hopes of getting money, and none of them work out. Particularly there's one that's particularly sad. And then they're going to ride out in search of this camel trader. Lymond goes after a Bedouin tribe, which we'll discuss later, I'm sure. And then Marta, Salablanca, and Jarrett are left behind, and they discover a clue. So that is the basics of chapter 7. So let's get into this beginning, where at the very beginning, Francis, I always pay attention to when Dunnett calls him Francis. I think Laura, you mentioned this a couple books ago, but just that's a sign that perhaps we're at a piece of Lymond's core when we see him referred to as Francis, or when someone else refers to him as Francis. So there's a thing here where he says that he makes sure that there was no misunderstanding about their mission and what they're doing to recover this child, and that he gives everyone sort of an option to leave at this point. It's like, I'm very clearly laying out what we're doing. If you want to ditch now. We're headed off in this direction. And I just like this idea that he's laying things out for everyone clearly, because he often doesn't. However, there's such a sense here for me that he is repressing his softer feelings towards the potential of his son in favor of this cold sort of mercenary, I'm going after a pawn. And of course, Jarrett, in his utter earnest cluelessness, doesn't see that. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I do agree with you. I think Lymond is trying to protect his own emotions by pretending there's this distance between them and the child, and that the mission is just to capture a pawn, and it doesn't really matter that it's, I mean, he says you must remove from your minds the image of a live human child. But like, we know from his vow that he really wants to save his son. So it's all this like distancing stuff is like, we already know that's not really what's going on. And if anything, it's like self-protective mechanism.
Yeah, I think that direction, you must remove the sentimentality, it's a direction to himself. Like, I need to remove this to be, to be successful. And I can see, there's perhaps an element of him being afraid of emotion, because emotion might make him fail. Like, if he wants to save this child, he has to do it analytically and play chess with Gabriel and play chess with a clear head. And so trying to divorce those emotions from himself, is perhaps part of his earnest desire to succeed. And yet it's also sad.
I think also there's two things. One is this theme of sentimentality, which, if you remember, we talked about it before when Philippa had the thought near the beginning that, she was later to look back and realize that if any romance existed in Lymond, there was no room for sentimentality. So this idea of sentimentality is something that, is like an over too much emotion or something, something that compromises your like ability to make the right choice. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I think is interesting is he keeps saying that the point is to get Gabriel. The point is not to save the baby. The point is to get Gabriel. And to some degree, that makes sense as like an ends justifies the means thing. Like, the baby is something that he wants for himself, but stopping Gabriel is something for the whole world. And so if he were to look at it in a completely unsentimental, just, ethical perspective, doing the thing that saves a whole bunch of people is more important than doing the thing that saves one person, even though that one person is your child, right? So I think Lymond is genuinely torn between those two motivations.
But isn't there a way that he can kind of do both? Isn't the point of saving the child who was the pawn, he's sort of getting rid of Gabriel's trump card so that he can win? Because that's what he's holding over Lymond at the moment.
I mean, that's his hope, right? That he can do both. Yeah. That's the hope. So, but I feel like he's trying to steel himself for the possibility that he will have to sacrifice the child to beat Gabriel. But of course, his hope is that he can do both. I mean, surely. So.
I think also note, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, there's a line it's on this first page where Jarrett is listening to this, and it says, Jarrett, remained for some reasons he knew and some he would not admit to himself.
Sounds like Jarrett.
Wonder what those could be, Jarrett.
Also notable here is Jarrett has started drinking too much, and he has a fight with Lymond about it, where he's like, if I want to drink, I'll drink.
Yeah.
And it just cracks me up because there's that line in Disorderly Nights where Jarrett is thinking to himself how he's this like paragon of self-control, and he's really not.
Really, really not. Yeah. Yeah. And he just, like, he's so angry. And I think it's an interesting question about, like, why does this make Jarrett so angry that Lymond is, at least from an external sense, treating this baby as a pawn? And like, what is it that Jarrett wants from Lymond that he's failing to get here that's making him so angry? And
what do you think it is?
I mean, I think it's this sign that Lymond is cold, and he doesn't want Lymond to be cold. Like, he wants him to be emotionally connected. And I think he's angry. I think he feels like he had formed a connection with Lymond, and maybe that's breaking or turning distant, and he's angry about it. I don't know. But I think
no, that makes a lot of sense, because they had that really intense moment of connection right before they found Una's body. And since then, Lymond has been, super messed up and cut off and all these things. And so I'm sure that it's not helping his relationship with Jarrett that he's not letting Jarrett in anymore, after he did let Jarrett in, which is what Jarrett wants.
Yeah. And Jarrett does not have the emotional, it's not emotional maturity. He doesn't have the emotional, like, savvy. He's not emotionally intelligent enough to see how broken and hurting Lymond is. Like, he's just reading the external signs and interpreting that in terms of how it impacts him. But I don't think he has, the emotional intelligence to see that it's not about him. Like, the fact that he's being pushed away is not really about him or his relationship with Lymond. It's about Lymond's pain and the devastation of finding Una's body and what that could mean. Yeah.
I mean, Lymond did warn him in the past chapter. He basically said, you must not let me push you away. Mm-hmm. It's like, you must try your hardest to, like, get past that, because I'm going to do it. I know how I work. This is who I am. Mm-hmm. And I need you by my side, even though I'm going to be going through this thing. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and it kind of works in this, because Lymond's like, if you're going to drink, you should leave. And Jarrett's like, I'm going to drink and I'm not going to leave.
Yeah, right. So deal with it.
Yeah.
Jarrett says a really interesting thing on page 120. He says, let me find it. I've had enough of obedience, chastity, sobriety, and poverty. Other men are not frigid, Francis. So, like, he's sort of done this, like, complete 180 from, like, his time in the order. Mm-hmm. So he still believes some of the things, but, like, he sort of cast off that shell and left it behind him at this moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then Lymond's like, I can get you a girl if you want, basically. And Jarrett's like, no, it's not the point. Yeah.
It does make a lot of sense, though, that Jarrett, having invested so much in the order and been burned, is now like kind of like, screw it all, screw all those vows, I'm gonna drink and whatever.
For sure, because he's so disillusioned. He was just so incredibly disillusioned. And so to have a response of just, well, F this, I'm going in the opposite direction, is completely reasonable. Yeah.
It is interesting, though, how he feels this way about the order now, but yet his connections to the order basically save his life in the upcoming chapters.
Mm-hmm. He feels guilty about it, too.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, because you'd think if he's so disillusioned with the order, like, he wouldn't care if he uses them to save himself, but he still does. He still cares.
It makes sense that his feelings would be mixed.
Yeah.
All right. Yep. So then we, do you want to jump to the moment with Marta and the little marble Cupid?
Mm-hmm.
So I love this moment. It's where they're in this town that is full of Roman ruins, and she actually dives into the water from the ship, and she finds this little marble Cupid from presumably the Roman times, you know, blurred by the abrasive seas and disfigured with mollusks. A gray, once marble Cupid lay in her palms, its wings honeycombed, its eyes hollow and vacant. Her own, staring at it, had lost all remembrance of herself. Her breathless young eagerness was something Jarrett remembered once in Francis Crawford before the years of disenchantment ground it away. So the sea at last will yield you its delights, Jarrett said. I thought you were perhaps like the Sarmates, who might not lie with a man till they had first killed one in battle. Like a rippling conch in the moonlight, her fingers closed fast on their prize. Must you spoil it? Must you spoil everything? She said, and turning abruptly in her dark runnels of wet, was instantly gone. So like that super makes me want to slap Jarrett because we get the most like human, vulnerable, open, enthusiastic, like this very sweet version of Marta that we've never seen before. And Jarrett, who is like really hungry for this, actually instead insults her and makes her, shut all those doors and storm off.
Yeah, like if he had just said, "Oh, this is an amazing thing that you found. Can I see it?" Like if he had just like somehow entered into her excitement at finding this and this delight that seems sort of childlike, and yeah, idiot again with the lack of emotional intelligence.
I think they'll be fine though. I'm sort of starting to totally ship them together. So, I mean, I would prefer a Lymond Jarrett ship, but that's probably not going to happen in these books. So why not get the next best thing? Basically the female exact duplicate of Lymond. So
I do feel like Jarrett needs someone who can just like whip him into shape, and like he just needs to have someone tell him what to do all the time. So she could do that for sure.
And these chapters come a long way in sort of establishing a baseline relationship for the two of them, because most of Lymond is absent for a large portion of these chapters, and it's kind of about the adventures these two sort of go on trying to find the child. So,
and even when he's there, he's really not the key player. She is.
Yeah, if I had any doubts or misgivings about Marta, they have been washed away by these chapters. I am absolutely
a little bit. Because there's still a couple of places where like she goes off and does things, and like it's very clear in the text that like she did a mysterious thing and we don't know what it is. And so I'm like, I like her. I like her a lot. I still have a little bit of what the hell is she doing off on her own?
And I'm sure that there is a mystery to be solved, but I don't think it's in a bad nature. I think that whatever she's doing is for the good of the order. I mean, not the order of the Knights Hospitaller. Not that order.
Yeah.
The greater good.
Maybe.
I think she's working for the Dom. I think she's some sort of agent, and she's sort of trying to make things happen for whatever the Dom has sort of set into motion. That maybe she's trying to make these prophecies come true.
Is she in league with the head concubine?
I don't know, but it's super. Oh, this is totally jumping ahead. But the fact that she shows up again, I was like, ah.
So she was there in, was it Lyon? Is that where they were all together? I can't remember. So maybe that would be interesting. We can talk about that later when we get there.
Yeah.
So I do have fan art of that moment, so I'll show.
Yes, please.
Here we go. Okay, so this is from Lenova Draws on Tumblr, and it's like a little comic.
Great.
Strip. Yeah, isn't this amazing? And so obviously the first panel is the Cupid, and then we have Marta with her open expression, Jarrett being a dick, Marta with her closed off expression, storming up.
Jarrett being a total dick.
He's his own worst enemy, really, sabotaging things that he wants.
So true. So true. So then we get this description of the town and this attempt to bring like people in to get news about where the baby is. and then people come with all these children, and Salablanca and Jarrett sort of wade through this mass of children.
So just heartbreaking too.
It's so sad. And they find this little boy who has been recently branded to match Carradine, but I mean, it's obvious that it's a very, very recent wound. And
like
Jarrett,
within the past couple days, right?
Hmm?
Like within the past couple days, probably as soon as they came to town and people found out that this is what they were looking for.
So Jarrett is horrified that children are being mutilated, and
and
just,
the baby
yeah.
is like with its mom, and the mom seems to have been complicit in the branding because she thinks that if the child is mistaken for a Carradine, that he will be rescued and given a good life. So it's like she's done this horrible mutilation that seems likely to kill her baby because she's trying to give him a better life. Oh, it's horrible.
Yeah.
So sad. And yeah, and Jarrett has this, you know, he's coming at Lymond with this, like, you're using children as weapons, you know, you and Gabriel are using children as weapons. And I can't imagine anything, well, maybe there's something more, but this is an incredibly painful thing for him to say to Lymond. Like, that, first of all, he's equating him and Gabriel and saying, like, the two of you are doing the same thing. And Lymond is, you know, we can imagine, like, the horror that he's feeling that this is happening. And yet he's saying, you know, he says honestly so that, like, we have to reject this child. We can't give this baby anything, because if we do, then we're going to have thousands of branded children coming to us. And he's not wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But so sad.
Well, and what you just said is, this is exactly the, like, sentimentality theme. Like, the sentimental thing would be to give the child some money,
Right.
but that, like, but it would actually just encourage more children to be hurt. And we even have Jarrett throwing that word back in Lymond's face, you know, talking about how Lymond and Gabriel are using children as weapons, and he says, or is that sentimental?
Mm-hmm. And Jarrett is being sentimental. He's letting his emotions and his compassion, which is admirable, but it's not useful in this sense. And yeah.
But it is interesting, going back to that moment where Lymond said he needs Jarrett. Like, I think Jarrett's sentimentality is something that Lymond finds helpful to have as, like, one perspective to kind of keep him from his super logical approach, like, driving everything, you know, like, it's a good check on some of his own instincts, but it's obviously not always the right thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So then we have that bit at the end of this section where he says, the boy is a pawn, the piece we must take is Gabriel. And so it's just that reiteration of, we are not going to be sentimental. Keep the goal in mind. Like, acquiring this child is not the goal. The goal is defeating Gabriel. And Jarrett believes him, I think, you know, that he believes that this is what Lymond genuinely thinks.
Do you think this is what Lymond genuinely thinks?
No, I don't think it's what Lymond genuinely thinks, but I think it's what he's telling himself. I think it's what Lymond is telling himself. And I think Jarrett, as he so often does, takes Lymond at face value and just doesn't push back. So, or pushes back on the wrong things. So.
I mean, I think it's interesting because Lymond is really torn. Part of him really does believe this. Part of him doesn't.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. I think his head believes this. Like, he knows that in the general sense of the world, like you said, defeating Gabriel is the greater good, like, true. But I don't think he genuinely can bring himself to, like, dive into that 100%. Like, there will always be, like, just because, like, the child is going to be more important to him. Like, even if it's not important to the rest of the world, it's the most important thing to him. So, yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so then they go off on this caravan, which Marta sneaks into.
Can we sorry, go back and just talk about one thing real quick?
Yeah, sure.
I'm sort of, I wish that there was more from the point of view of Salablanca, because he is shown to be such a level-headed character during this. When the branding child incident happens, Jarrett's first instinct is to just kind of rail against it and scream and yell. And he's like on the cusp of saying something that would probably not be great. And Salablanca has also read the situation and is just so incredibly diplomatic about it. I just sort of love how he steps up in that moment and sort of takes charge. There's a really interesting parallel about how like Jarrett and Salablanca are both like these trusted advisors for Lymond, but yet they're so different in, you know, their character builds.
Yeah, I think Salamanca has this quiet competence that like explains why Lymond really like relies on him and trusts him. In fact, he seems to be a lot more level-headed, like you said, than Jarrett.
Well, I mean, he's also a lot more sort of used to the cultures and practices of this area of the world. So that's part of it. But
he's so trustworthy.
Yeah.
Yeah, he feels so trustworthy. And I agree. I wish we got to see more of his character. There's a little bit of me that feels like his character is kind of like a Deus Ex Machina is not the right term because that's not what this is, but he's kind of a useful character that's just sort of doing things because they need a character to do those things, as opposed to being a fully realized rich character, just because we don't get to see his internal life very much, or if at all. Like we've had tiny glimpses of who he is, but for the most part we don't get to see his character, which I hope that changes. I'd really like to
me too,
see more of who he is and all of that.
I agree. I think it would be a better book if we saw more Salamanca.
Yeah, he's kind of a flat character, and I would like to see him become a round character. Okay, so we're in the caravan that Marta sneaks into. And
so like Lymond, can I just say? Yeah. In disguise, going where she wants, doing what she wants.
Yeah, and I love she's just like, it's kind of hard for women to get things done here, so I'm just gonna be a man for a while so I can get stuff done.
Not her first time at the rodeo.
Yep. I do love this little moment where also like Lymond figures it out immediately. He's like, oh yeah, my younger brother's at the front. Like, he knows exactly what's happened. But I love this bit when they're confronting each other, and he has this comment about it's simpler to be dressed as a man, and then Lymond says like you're apt to find the excitable men waiting lined up in queues. And she replies, I stand corrected, but then, and there's some phrase, looks like Latin, I don't know what it is. You know so much more of that than I do, which is kind of an interesting phrase. And then he asked who she's running from, your father. And she replies, you're welcome to think so if you will accept the corollary, implying that he's running from his father, perhaps?
No, I think the corollary is that he's running from his mother.
He's running from his mother. Okay, which, interesting. And then it says, Francis Crawford, smiling at the brightening dawn, his hands closed on his reins, said, Pax, which means peace. We can bring each other too quickly, perhaps below the cuticle. And then just like, so basically he's like, we can get under each other's skin too quickly, and he cries peace. And I think that's an interesting, like, just an interesting commentary on their relationship, that they have quickly come to know each other so well that they can irritate each other very quickly.
Remember in the previous section that we read, like her insights changed the complete course of the book and of his journey, sent him after the child instead of to Malta after Gabriel, convinced him to let her stay. So like she has these insights and these ability to understand what's going on with him and like get to him better than anybody that we've ever met, except maybe Margaret Lennox, but Margaret Lennox only does it in a hurtful way. So I think it's fascinating that like every time she snipes at him, you're getting some kind of revelation about Lymond because she's so insightful. Like, why do you think she implies that he's running from his mother?
Well, is his mother, does his mother have information that he doesn't want to learn? Like,
what kind of information?
I think there's some parentage this stuff going on here. And I mean, Marta, whether she's his sister or not, she's certainly fulfilling the function of a sister. Like they're sniping at each other like siblings. Like that's what this feels like to me. And so whether that's their technical relationship or not, it does feel like she's fulfilling that role. And I will be very surprised if they're not half siblings.
Oh, they have to be. They're definitely related.
So.
Why would he be running from his mother now? Because he wasn't running from his mother at the end of the last book. He was around his mom all the time.
Maybe seeing Marta gives proof to the rumors that he's heard all of his life about sort of the bastard theory that him and Richard, that he didn't want to believe it, but now faced right to it, he knows that something is amiss, and now he doesn't want to face his mother because he has knowledge that he didn't have before.
Yeah, she's certainly concrete evidence that something fishy is happening in their family tree. So
yeah, something fishy, and he doesn't want to know.
He doesn't want to know what it is, and I do want to know what it is.
Just for the heck of it, looked up what that little thing means in Latin, the Incilium Cupiens Vitare Charybdum, because I recognized Scylla and Charybdis from the Odyssey. They're the sort of two monsters that Odysseus has to choose between. And the translation is between Scylla and Charybdis. So.
Actually, I'm very glad you looked that up because this, the Odyssey is a great thing to read alongside this book because they're going to a whole bunch of places from the Odyssey, and it like recurs throughout. Like we already had Una as Calypso on Gozo, and it just keeps going from there. So keep looking for the Odyssey in here.
True, we know that Philippa is headed to Thessalonica, or however you say it, which is one of the Greek islands. So
yeah,
that's cool.
Well, and she's also headed directly to the one that starts with a K that I'm forgetting the name, but it's, or no, Z.
Zakynthos.
Zakynthos, something like that. Yeah. So we shall see.
Where she has to go to the temple of the moon. I forget what the Dame de Tutance told her, but some temple.
Something like that. So then we get, at the top of 128, we get this, like, this is the kind of thing that's making me just a titch suspicious of Marta, where it says, twice Marta left them, both times during daylight, to call on some usurer friend of Gautier's in one of the walled towns they visited. And Salablanca, prompted by Lymond, was everywhere, talking, smiling, asking questions. So Marta definitely has some sort of agenda that she is following, whether it's a benign, like just business that she's following up on, or whether there's something else going on that's beneficial, or whether there's something sinister. I don't think we know.
I mean, it might just be something as simple as Gautier is sending her to these towns to do his business because he's stuck on the Dauphiné.
I mean, I think that's the implication.
Yeah.
That's what's happening, but I just don't know if there's something more to it than that. So
we do know that she's already well traveled and that she does this a lot, which makes sense because she's very experienced with traveling. But yeah, who knows what she's up to?
She's just goes off and does stuff. It's great. Hi. So then they catch up with Ali Rashid, Unfortunately, to no avail. He was paid to keep this child and Cady, the nurse, for 3 weeks and then sell them again, which he did. And yeah. So I don't know if you had anything about him.
What page are you on? Sorry.
It's like 128, 29. He sits down with Ali Rashid, exchange money. He tells them like he sold the child onto these Bedouins. He's very greedy.
I made no notes on this section.
Yeah, it's like that's what we have.
I liked, this has nothing to really do to bear with the plot, but I just like how Salablanca sewed all the rest of the money into Marta's saddle.
Yeah.
It's like, of course she knows it immediately. But.
Right. I love the fact later that she just does this total dig on Jarrett where she's like, since none of you decided to help me saddle my horse, I figured it out really quick, you idiots, because gold is heavy. It's like, of course, like the first time she unsaddled her horse, she figured out that her saddle weighed like multiple pounds, probably heavier than it weighed the last time she saddled her horse. So
yeah, that super cracked me up.
It was like, so
fun. Jarrett, be more chivalrous. Come on.
Right, exactly. Although you kind of also get the sense like if he offered to do it, she probably would have like turned him down and just been like, I can do it myself. But he didn't even offer. So it makes me wonder, like, if the fact that she's dressed like a man has, because Jarrett, he's just, bless him, he's so driven by the surface of things. And so Marta is there dressed as a man. And so he's not doing like the things that he's sort of been raised to do for women, even though she's definitely still a woman. Like he should be doing things like offering to saddle her horse and doing like all of this stuff if he's following sort of the rules of his childhood, but he's not. And I think it's just because he's like, okay.
She's a man now.
He's a man. Like,
I think it's even better for him.
Yeah, right? Since that's what he really wants.
Right.
Yeah, I think it could be that, or it could just be like he thinks she's going to bite his head off and he's afraid of it. But either way, yeah, he really should have at least offered.
Yeah. Sorry about the siren outside. Yeah, so Marta decides to stay with them. And yeah, again, she's just sort of in and out of the small towns. And it says that she comes back with like a string of sardonic anecdotes concerning her day's observations and no account at all of her own employment, whatever it was. So we again get this little hint that she's doing something, but we don't know what it is. So
it's true.
Whatever it is, who knows? Yeah. So, and Jarrett doesn't want to challenge her wit. She's got this dry, sarcastic wit, and
because he'd lose.
Yeah, he would lose.
Absolutely. And I think he knows that. I think he knows he's never won a battle of wits with Lymond, so he's not going to try it with Marta.
For a woman, it seemed to him at times excessive to tiresomeness. She's so witty for a woman, and he's just like, he can't keep up. It's too much for him. So he's like being sexist about it.
Yeah, she wears him out. So then they meet with this dervish. Like, so I'm guessing kind of like religious man / fortune teller / monk kind of character, who seems to be living a life of poverty and all that. And so he tells him this tale of what's happened to the child, that the Cady escaped from the Bedouins and ended up with the silk trader and da-da-da-da-da. So Jarrett goes off to find the child.
And this is where we start getting the sort of beautiful horror imagery of the silkworms at the end of this chapter. The horned worm of India, at whose mating men rejoice as at a wedding, from whose bowels came the robes Cleopatra wore, spun from the wind. Go look, Mr. Blythe, for mulberry bush. Like, just beautiful, poetic, romantic imagery, and then as we continue onward, it goes more and more into like horror imagery.
Yeah.
And it also goes really well with this image of, you know, these children suffering and dying in horrible ways that we keep getting through this book.
Mm.
I'm sort of waiting and hoping to see the point where Jarrett finally realizes not to run after that first tiny little bit of information he gets. Because it's always, every instance so far in this book has been a trap, and it's almost an obvious baiting. It's like, hey, maybe you have to dig a little bit harder for these things, because the first thing that comes along your way is probably Gabriel playing with you, by the way.
But it's actually interesting because they skip ahead in Gabriel's plan. So Jarrett actually gets closer to the kid than was intended at this point. He almost, like, you know, if it had turned out a little differently, they might have actually been able to break Gabriel's plan because he got much further than he was supposed to yet.
Yeah, and the plan, like this trap was not set for Jarrett, so it didn't spring correctly because it was set for Lymond. So by him going off like impulsively, he actually enabled, like it was a good thing because they sprung the trap prematurely and it didn't work.
Yeah.
So
if only he'd just been a little faster and gotten that kid out. Go ahead.
Was that actually the kid?
That's my theory. I don't think it is. I think that is Gabriel and Jolita's son. I do not think it is because I think he's too old.
That's what I was thinking.
I went through the dates, so we're skipping ahead a bunch, but I went through the dates of when all this should be. So Lymond and Una slept together in June of 1551, which means the baby should have been born in early 1552. So like July, August, September, October, November, December, January, February, March. So somewhere between like late January, early March, the baby should have been born of 1552. So if the baby was born early, like the oldest, the baby, and this is late spring 1553. So this is like April, maybe May 1553. So the oldest Lymond's child can be right now is like 15 or 16 months old. And that kid in that building is older than 15 years old. Like there's no way.
I was imagining like a 2 or 3 year old.
Yeah, like a 3-year-old.
It was described. And I was like, this can't actually be Caredon.
No, it can't. It's got, I think that kid is Gabriel and Jolita's kid. I don't think it's.
See, I like that theory. I didn't think about that. I was just thinking there's no possible way this is actually Lymond's child. But that throws an interesting.
Yeah, I think that kid is too old. That doesn't take away from the tragic.
No, not at all.
What's happening to the kid? Like it's terrible.
Well, that's almost.
I don't
worse.
think it's
if that's Gabriel's kid, the way that he's treating his own child. I mean, we already know Gabriel is a horrible human being, but like, whew.
Yeah, but we said like in the last book, we talked about how there's like these 2 babies floating around, you know, and they're both probably blonde and they're both, but one of them is significantly older than the other, especially for children. Like,
because it was born, that child was born before Jolita ever even went to Scotland.
Right, ever even went to Scotland. So he's got to be at least a year and a half. I mean, I didn't figure out those dates. So it's at least like a year and a half older than Caredon, which for a little kid, that's pretty significant in terms of development. So, but it also makes a lot of sense that Jarrett would not know this at all. Like, there's no way that Jarrett's going to understand like how old a toddler should be or like what developmental stage a toddler should be able to be at. So it's completely understandable. Also, he's super drugged. So.
And also, he wasn't around. He never met Una. He just found the body. He doesn't know the time frame for when, you know, the child was conceived or born. So
yeah, and he does say like there's multiple points where he says like this kid does not look like Lymond at all.
Yeah, that's true.
So
which means Philippa really is going to find the real child somewhere in Greek. Yay!
Yeah, but then it's like, so then where's the real kid? Like, if they're chasing after the wrong kid, where's the right kid? You know?
I don't know. Well, when we get back to Philip, I think that's where we'll find him.
Laura's face is giving us nothing.
No, she's just kind of watching and smiling. And
I have opinions, but it's not time to share them yet.
Okay. Anyway, so he's gonna go to the mulberry bush. So he sneaks into he goes after the child in Mehdia, and gets captured, tricked, drugged, captured, poisoned. And then Lymond and Salablanca and Marta sneak into the town through this very elaborate deception that's lovely and a bit raunchy.
It totally reminded me of book 1, Game of Kings, when Lymond was posing as, I forget his name.
Don Luis.
Don Luis.
Oh, yeah. Totally. Yes. The Spaniard. Yeah. And
Marta can pull off the same thing. It tells you a lot about their relationship.
Yes. So then they get do they get him out in this chapter?
No.
No, that's the next chapter.
No.
Okay. So they sneak in and they pretend to be these Spanish noble people. And okay. So this whole section, this beginning section with Jarrett and the silk trader, I just kept going, this is too easy. This is a trap. Like multiple points I wrote, this seems really easy. So when the trap sprung, I was like, yeah.
Well, it builds and builds, and you get these moments of like slow hints of things being not quite right, and Jarrett feeling like woozy, and it's definitely
Too smoky, and things smell strong, and he's like breathing in heavy perfume, and you're like, is that drugged?
Well, yeah. So going in order, I guess, there's a line that I really like at the beginning, actually, when Marta makes the comment about Lymond, and Jarrett thinks, which is precisely the kind of bitchy remark, thought Jarrett furiously, that Lymond himself would have made.
So, I love that. I love that too. So then at 136, by the way, it says he mounted his horse and rode east into High Spring in the enemy-held territory of Mehdia. So that's what made me think that we are in like April or May of 1553. So that was my timing for figuring out all of that.
This other Dunnett is so good at describing places. This beautiful couple of paragraphs describing the area of Mehdia on page 136. It just totally immerses me in this world, and like I can picture it so vividly in my head.
It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. And I love this line about halfway down the page where it says, and Jarrett, who had wished to be alone for his own sake as well as for Lymond's, closed his eyes as he sat under the orange trees and prayed for Francis Crawford, who did not recognize love, and for himself, who did. And you're just like, you asshat. He's just, I just wrote, oh geez, to the side of it, because like, really?
What do you think is going on with Jarrett there, though? What is inspiring these emotions?
I think it gets back to he wants Francis Crawford to love him, and he doesn't, or he doesn't see it.
Well, and I found it interesting in that same paragraph, one of the descriptors that she uses is, and the blue of the cornflowers and wild lupin and hyacinth. So like maybe the color of these flowers, which is so often used to describe Sibylla and Francis's eyes, maybe that's sort of putting Jarrett into this frame of mind where he's thinking about things.
And he just wants Lymond to be overtly emotional, and Lymond is not being overtly emotional. Like Jarrett's understanding of Lymond's capacity to love is so based on his surface understanding of Lymond instead of Lymond's actual capacity to love.
I think it depends what kind of love we're talking about. I think we know Lymond can recognize familial love, because we see it with his brother and his mother and with the kid. Whether Lymond can recognize romantic love is a question mark. Lymond didn't seem able to recognize or acknowledge it with Christian or Una. Maybe he felt it with Margaret Lennox as a kid and got super burned by the experience. But actually, I think Jarrett might have some insights here into Lymond not being able to allow himself to feel romantic love.
Yeah.
I still think he probably would have gotten there eventually with Christian had things gone differently. Just
yeah.
Even more heartbreaking, but
yeah. Sad. One thing I thought was interesting is Jarrett's this little bit where he's talking about sort of leading this man into giving him information that he wants. And so he says that he knows that this farmer is like wary of the danger. And so he shapes the conversation with infinite patience. And you get this sense that he's really trying hard to be smart about this and to do things in a way that is going to bring about the outcome that he wants. And he's trying to sort of manipulate this man into giving him the information that he wants. Of course, all along, the guy knows exactly what he's doing and is actually the one who's manipulating Jarrett. But you just feel like, oh, buddy, like you're trying.
Trying.
He's trying,
So I think also like we have again like the build up in this chapter of the horror imagery with like the insects and the children. Like on 137 we've got the insects fed unremittingly day and night from the 40 meals of their first day of life they would feed, and like just soon their first skin would be cast, feet, skull, jaws, and teeth discarded in husk, and the revealed worm, wrinkled and pale, would fall to eating again. As the farmer talked, children, dark-haired and quiet, moved in and out between the piled ranks of trays with reeded baskets of leaves. And then cutting ahead, Jarrett talks about the children being quiet, and the farmer talks about how they're tired because the leaves have to be gathered and the grubs have to be satisfied day and night and kept warm, and like vermin have to be frightened away. And then Jarrett makes a comment, grown slaves sleep less than children. And the farmer says they cost more, meaning they're having all these like tiny child labor slaves do all this caring for these silkworm insects because they're cheaper than adult slaves. And this is before we realize it's a whorehouse with child prostitution. So it's already this like creepy, abusive child slavery thing. And then it just gets worse and worse.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like in Queen's Play, we had like some horrible things happening to animals in Queen's Play. And then here, it's like the horror has been ramped up like decisively to where now we have horrible things happening to children. And
yeah, and so then it gets worse on 138. We start to have these hints that it's a whorehouse, where we have the farmer talks about Kyredin and he says, "You speak of my jewel, soft, tender, delicate, the brother of angels and lustrous in beauty as the golden-skinned moon." Oh, it's horrible. And then they talk about the silkworms like being born and then dying 2 days later. And Jarrett asks if they kill them, and I don't know the actual biology, but he basically says, no, they basically like that's how they work. They're born, they mate, and they die. So again, this like imagery of something being born just to die compared with like this child who's been born to like abuse and suffering.
Well, I mean, my understanding of the way it works is that they spin the cocoon, which is the silk. So they're going to turn into a moth, but they don't want them to turn into a moth because if they turn into a moth, then they'll break out of the cocoon, which destroys the silk. So they boil them to kill them inside the cocoon to get the silk, and they'll let some of them become moths because then they'll get more aphids, which become more caterpillars. But most of them they boil in the cocoon, which so.
And there's got to be millions of these things to make that much silk, because a cocoon is probably pretty small for these critters.
Yeah.
It's like, I think part of what makes these images so horrible is the images of beauty that go along with them, like these insects making beautiful silk and these abused slave children being perfumed and used as like sex objects. Oh, it's horrible.
Yeah. And I mean, I think there's another darker bit where he's talking about the child. He says, the child is mine, and it's just this ownership of people, which is inherently horrific. And then he says, his slave she spends in Mehida and in my sister's house, and has care of the child until he may be taken to train. And then there's an ellipsis, which is like, he cuts off what they're training the child for, but obviously it's prostitution, and that this boy is going to be, some sort of, I mean, he's blonde in a country where there aren't very many blonde people. So he's going to be a particularly special prostitute.
And it's kind of like, she does a really good use of point of view here by having this be Jared's point of view. And because he's so naive, he's not catching on, but you as the reader are. So you just have this like creeping sense of horror that like he doesn't know to have yet.
Yeah. Yeah. So we get a little break in this creeping sense of horror where Lymond returns and says, where's Jarrett? And then we find out that at this point, this is where we find out the whole thing is a trap, because Lymond says, they explain, like, they talked to this dervish and Jarrett went into the city, and Lymond's like, oh, this is still, a dervish told me the exact same thing. So this is still Gabriel's circuit. Jarrett just cut across 2 of the stages, that's all. So we know that Jarrett is doing exactly what Gabriel wants him to do. So any thoughts on that before we get back to Jarrett and the horror?
Yeah, there's not a very large section. I don't think much happens.
Yeah. So then we just get these moments of him like moving deeper into this house, into this place. Things like he hears the gates to the street quietly close, a child squeaked, and in the gallery a man laughed, and then a door shut. And it's just, oh.
Yeah. And then we meet the silk farmer's sister, and Jared's like, wow, silk trading must be a really lucrative trade because her cushions are so nice, and she's wearing these gold bracelets. And it's like, no, dude, it's not just the silk farming that's brought in all this money.
Yeah.
And then we meet Ketty. Thoughts on, so basically, Jarrett asks her questions. She answers them all correctly. She talks about Una. She speaks in Gaelic. She describes what happened in a way that matches up with what Jarrett's experience is of, what happened to Una. If this wasn't Lymond's child, why does Ketty know Una? Why is she speaking Gaelic? What's your take?
I mean, she could have been around Una while it happened, whilst Una was pregnant and, was available, but then Gabriel could have managed to make a switch right when the child was born.
But it describes, she says, Una was sick, Effendi, in that terrible house with the goats on the floor. She could not carry water. She said, Fog me Lydia, leave me to God, in Gaelic. And then Shakib came to buy us, which we remember from before. Shakib is the one who bought the kid and took them to Ali Rashid. And Kenny knows that the lady was left behind, so she wasn't just there before Kyreden was born. She was there up until the point where Una died.
Unless Una knew that she was sort of rearing the wrong child, and there was nothing she could do about it, or maybe wrong, and it really is Kyreden.
Also, and maybe this is a little too convoluted for, maybe the simplest answer is that this is Kyreden and he's just a ridiculously precocious 15-month-old. But also nothing that she said is unknown to other people. Like, she doesn't say anything that other people couldn't figure out. Like, even the Gaelic that she says Una said, like, someone could have, that could be someone's guess about what she said. Anyway, the whole point is, like, it could be that Ketty is lying all the way through this because she's been beaten or tortured or starved or paid and she ends up dead, in a couple of pages, but that doesn't mean she knows she's going to end up dead at this point. So it's possible that this is completely trustworthy and that she's giving a true account of her experience, but it's also possible that it's a complete fake and she isn't. So I don't know.
So then we just kind of continue the horror through the next section where the guy describes Kyreden, those soft, small fingers, that delicate skin, such beauty. And again, we have the sound of laughter and children's voices and music. And then Jarrett, as the kid goes by, smells this intense perfume and realizes they're all drenched in perfume. And he still hasn't figured out he's in a whorehouse because it's Jarrett and his brain doesn't think such horrible things. And then we go in and we get the horror imagery of the insects. They were in their hundreds, winding sheets of indigo fed, each enclosing the shriveled corpse of its host. 2,000 to make 1 single pound of raw silk for an emperor's robe. So this imagery of exploitation and death to make beautiful things for rich people. Mm-hmm. And then we meet the kid. What makes you guys think the kid is older than he should be? Like, what does he do?
So, okay. So partly he's not. So this bit about, like, he comes unsteady as a new lamb with the flat-footed gait of the very little. So that would be in line with being like 15 months old, toddling. But so then he says, Jarrett says he's paralyzed with nervous reluctance to see before him distressingly Francis Crawford again as a child. What he saw was a small European boy who was himself only, who with a babyhood behind him of dirt and terror and darkness had been left solitary at night in a locked warehouse, who now stood before him barefoot in his crumpled striped shirt and contrived a smile round-eyed with his soft kitten's mouth. Okay, so he's got a baby face. Returning the stare of that devouring blue gaze, Jarrett could see nothing of Lymond but his coloring, and perhaps the sweep of the fine, thick lashes fringing his eyes. So this is where I started to think maybe this isn't Kyreden. Not so much because of what he's doing, but because of the way Jarrett Dunnett is having Jarrett say he doesn't recognize anything of Lymond in this kid. The spaced features, the curled nose, the faint brows, the blue were his own and neither Lymond's nor Una's, which makes me wonder, did he ever actually see Una? How does he know that these aren't?
He saw her body.
Yeah, he only saw
her body, that's right. Jarrett, a bachelor and still to all purposes a monk, nonetheless felt the pull, the painful desire to enfold this unwanted child with peace, security, and warmth, and to set him in his grandmother's arms within orderly days in the land of his heritage. And you're just like, oh, sweet. So then we get this where it's like Kyreden is like, or this kid is like seducing Jarrett. Like we have this moment where at the direction of the Syrian, the child stepped forward to Jarrett's shoulder and putting one arm around his neck, curled round to kiss the hollow of his neck of his shirt. And Jarrett, caught utterly unawares by the practiced, sensuous gesture, smelled at last the reeking perfume on the little boy's shirt and saw the paint on his lips. And as he flung the so this is where Jarrett like figures out what's happening. But it's that, I think it's just that practiced, sensuous gesture. And I wrote off to the side, like, how old is this kid? So it just feels like cognitively that's more advanced than a 15-month-old could do. Like, it's more like a 3-year-old.
But that doesn't mean that you couldn't train an abused child to do this.
Sure, but it just felt like that. I don't know. It felt more intentional. I don't know why. It just seems like, yeah. Just, I don't know. I just think of like the 15-month-olds that I've been around. I just don't know if they could do that. Like, even if they were abused, like, it just seems it seems an advanced thing for a little kid to be able to do. So I don't know, a teeny tiny kid.
It makes me so sad that Jarrett, in his horror, throws the kid away when, you know, his horror should be at the people abusing the kid, not at the kid himself.
No. And then he gets attacked, and it had been a trick.
Surprise! No, not really.
And they poison him with burning silkworm.
I guess silk is poisonous if it burns. Something I never knew.
Yes.
Me neither.
Hydrocyanic gas.
Oh boy. Yep, apparently so.
Yeah.
But it doesn't even work. I mean, it does kill Kitty, but like, I guess he's far enough away from it that he doesn't breathe enough of it in before he sort of...
Or it says that he's got, what's the phrase? It's actually the beginning of the next chapter. It says, his nervous and bronchial systems were roughly as frail as a bison's. So
he's just tough.
He's a
and
tough.
It still makes him really sick. I mean, he's super sick throughout the next chapter too.
Yeah, definitely. It comes close.
Yeah. Then we get this, while Jarrett is being poisoned and being taken to the jail, we get Lymond, Salamanca, and Marta sneaking into the town.
So before we jump into that, I also want to mention the boy doesn't say anything, or if he does, he says very little. Right? So we don't get an idea of his age based on his speech.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it says they scooped him up. The little boy only came to life on the threshold as they passed the stout form of the silk farmer. Grasping a little from the spread-eagled hand gripping his chest, the child ducked his head, and his eyes seeking the Syrian, pressed a conciliatory kiss on his captor's muscular arm. And that's the last we see of him.
Jarrett also isn't entirely sure if the child understands him, because he speaks to him. He spoke deliberately in English, and he thought for a moment that the child understood, but, you know, he's not sure of that. So
but why would he understand English?
Well, exactly.
There's no reason for the kid to know English.
Una spoke English.
But she wasn't with him very much. There's like that whole point where like she completely rejected him and he was raised by, like, maybe he does, but there's no reason to think that he does.
Ketty speaks English, and he was, if Ketty's telling the truth, then he was with Ketty and Una when they were sold into slavery.
But would she speak English with a baby? Like, it's not her native language. Maybe he does, but I don't think we should assume that he does.
Ketty and Una would have English in common.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think we need to see some more evidence one way or the other to find out who this child really is.
I'm still super suspicious.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And if it's not, okay, so if this is Lymond's baby, if this is Corydon, then where's the other baby? Like, because I feel like that is a thread that's hanging out there. And if that, I mean, it's kind of like Chekhov's gun, you know, it's just hanging on the wall. And if we go through this book that's all about like missing child rescuing missing child, and there's a whole other missing child that doesn't come up at all, I will be disappointed. Like that thread got completely dropped. So I don't think Dunnett is gonna, like, I trust her enough as an author not to leave that hanging forever. So if this is Corydon, then where is other nameless boy? Do we know it's a boy? We actually don't know that, do we? We just know there's a baby.
We know there's a baby. I don't remember.
I think there's a baby. We don't know gender unspecified. Maybe. I'm assuming boy just because it makes a nice parallel, but I don't think we actually know that.
I mean, coming from another perspective, Gabriel meant this trap for Lymond, and he meant the poison to kill him. And he even had plans for if the poison doesn't kill him. But I can totally see in Gabriel's mind that he wouldn't want to give Lymond the satisfaction of actually finding his child before he died.
Yeah.
Well,
I
what's
mean,
the satisfaction is there in your child being like sold into prostitution, though?
in the long game, though, if Lymond rescues Gabriel's son and not his own, like, that's a huge blow. Like, if he expends all of this energy and time, etc., and the end result is that he rescues his enemy's child instead of his own, that, I mean, that's some chess right there. So.
But he can't use Gabriel's child as leverage against him. We've already, if that is Gabriel's child, then Gabriel clearly doesn't care about the health and well-being.
No. I don't think Gabriel cares about the kid at all. I'm just saying he would have thwarted Lymond's plan to rescue his son, replaced the baby that Lymond cares about with his own son, and then Lymond finds out about it. Like, that's devastating.
Yeah. It's like I just did all of this for nothing.
Right. Yeah. So
Guess we'll see.
Of course, ignoring the fact that these are two completely innocent kids who are caught up in the middle of all of this. Okay. So then we get the deception, which is delightful.
Yes. You need some humor after all this darkness.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh my goodness, did we need some humor? And this whole, like, Marta's sick, and her sickness is that she's gonna strip naked at any moment.
She's gonna tear off all her clothes, and the men who are guarding the fort or whatever are like, oh, okay, she can come in.
Okay, maybe we should deal with this lady who's gonna get stripped naked at any moment.
Super hot lady is gonna strip naked.
Like, this is a thing we could do.
And then when she says that, he remarks on how similar she looks to Lymond, and there's implication that he's like a bastard child of her father. And the guy asks if they have the same fits, and she says approximately. They scream, struggle, and try to throw off all my clothes.
Yeah.
And then Lymond just he goes on, and the guy's like, how has such a beautiful woman not been married? And Lymond's like, she's been married 5 times and they've all died.
They've all mysteriously died.
Yes. This is just super entertaining. And then when she has her fit and Lymond screams, if she undresses, I pray you do not restrain her. It can cause untold injury.
Yeah, and then there's just like bits of clothing like strewn to lead them astray while she's on the roof. Oh, so great. Yeah. So then they figure out what's happened. I mean, they find the house and they find the burned thing at the back, and so they figure out that Jarrett is probably at the castle, and they're going to, just march up. I mean, like, they're not sneaking around here. They're just gonna march right up to the castle. And I love, Lymond slung her his cloak, resumed his own finery, and for a moment stood still, looking at Marta. You enjoy this, he said. And Marta, surprise and contempt on her face, said, of course.
Oh, they're siblings. Come on.
Both are enjoying.
So good. Yeah. So then we get getting Jarrett out of jail, and some more dark stuff.
So the first sentence of chapter 9 is really interesting. It says, unlike Francis Crawford, whose game with life was a strange and rootless affair played with the intellect, Jarrett had a passionate instinct to live. Do you guys agree with that? What do you think?
I do think we've seen Lymond be careless with his own life many times. He does not hold his own life with the value that he holds the lives of others.
I agree with it. Mm-hmm. I've read lots of debate about it on the internet, but I agree with it too.
Yeah, I think it's evident he's willing to take risks with his own safety, to protect and save others.
Do you agree that it's his game, like he treats life like a game played with the intellect?
In some ways. I mean, what he's doing right now with Gabriel is just a long drawn out game of chess, which is clearly a game played with intellect.
I think that Lymond is valued by other people for his intellect. And so I think that we know that his self-image is terrible in many ways. Like his concept of himself and his own value is, in some ways, really low, and in other ways, not. Like he's unwilling to be a pawn by the Dowager Queen. He's unwilling to be used in various ways. So he does value himself in not wanting to be, a pawn of the court and things like that. But we know that he doesn't see himself. He's got struggles with his self-image. And so I think he sees, like, he's valued by others for his intellect and how smart he is and how he can figure things out. And like, as an advisor, he would be very valuable and all of that. But does he then see that is what he brings to life, that it's just his intellect, it's just his ability to play other people that is what he brings to the world? Or does he see that as a I can't think of the words. Like, does he see it as all he has to offer, and so it's what he offers, as opposed to the fact that he's got more, and he has a rich emotional life, and he cares deeply, and he's deeply loyal, and all of those things. But does he see that as something he can offer? I don't know.
It's also like, whose point of view are we in? Is this the omniscient narrator? Is this Jarrett? I actually think this is the omniscient narrator, but it's sort of ambiguous.
Yeah. And you kind of have to wonder, like, there's a difference between Lymond actually, it says, whose game with life was a strange and ruthless affair played with the intellect. Like, if that is Lymond at his core, or if that is Lymond as he believes his core to be, which are different things.
Sure.
And I do think, like, Lymond's really trying to figure out his place, and he hasn't found it yet. So I like that description of strange and rootless, because it's not that he doesn't want to find his place, but he hasn't yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And certainly France does not seem to be it. Like,
no.
This whole estate he's got in France does not seem to be, yeah.
But St. Mary's didn't work out so great either. So,
What?
St. Mary's didn't work out so great either.
At least not so far.
Well, I don't think his plan was ever to sort of do with St. Mary's what he did. I think he had to leave St. Mary's to search for the kid, which he didn't know was about. So it's sort of, something else happened, or else he would have still probably been with them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then we jump back in time to Jarrett on the floor of this shack, and how he gets out, which is basically him he does figure it out. He figures out what's going on, and is able to burn down the door. Some sort of shenanigans with fire, and and basically walks into the guard, like just gives himself up. And then Lymond shows up in his jail cell and sort of gives him this plan of, hey, you're a knight. You got to be a knight. Can you do it? And Jarrett's like, yeah, I can do it. And so then they sort of fool the governor into letting them all go. They go with some soldiers, and then they get caught again, which we will discuss when we get there.
So I think the interesting part in Lymond's conversation with Jarrett when he first wakes up is when Jarrett says he saw the boy. You saw him, said Lymond. Then, because he had spoken too sharply and Jarrett was only half conscious, he added, never mind, tell me after. At least tell me now if he is living. So for all this stuff about how the child is a pawn and the point is to get Gabriel, the second Lymond's like, you saw him? Is he alive? Like, he can't stop that emotion from coming out, even though he's trying to be totally driven by intellect alone.
Yeah. Yeah, and then we get this little moment where Jarrett is talking about the boy, and it says, Lymond studied his hands. In the strengthening light, Jarrett saw his brows lifted, creasing as if in habitual boredom, and his lashes flicked once. And then he gives this like derisive statement, but it's like Lymond is looking at his hands.
Yeah, and this is after finding out that his child is, in this child prostitution situation. Super horrible. And like, we're in Jarrett's point of view, so he sees as if in habitual boredom, but we know from
it's not exactly.
Yeah, that it's like super intense.
It just means his face is, he schooled his face to show nothing, which Jarrett believes. And yeah, it's not.
I think also important throughout this whole sequence is Jarrett is very seriously injured and Lymond is really worried about him. So even though it doesn't come out explicitly, it's like implicit in a lot of what Lymond does. He's trying to protect Jarrett.
Yeah.
So he's like, all right, let's just go back to, the plan to get you out of here.
Yeah. So they do this whole scene with the governor, which is delightful, but I didn't really make many notes on it. It's just them like fooling the governor and Jarrett asserting his status as a knight, and he does a good job of it. And
Marta is absolutely brilliant. She comes in and plays it like a joke, and then she pretends to then suddenly notice, like she pretends she doesn't know Jarrett, and then just suddenly notice that he's injured, and then to be like, how dare you, the Grand Master of his order will come and protect him, like you're in trouble for letting him get hurt, and like everyone, of course, the governor like believes that it's all true. She's like, it's just funny because she's so inspired and she's so funny and she's so similar to Lymond in those moments when he does similar things, when he plays a character and gets really into the role, and it's hilarious.
Yeah. It's just like, you explain. It's like that, if you're caught in a risky situation, just double down on your authority, like, yeah. It's so anyway, and then Jarrett's, of course, like, I guess I'll forgive you if you give me, help me heal and all this. So I think Jarrett does a pretty good job of like playing along, and I was impressed that he didn't screw it up. Like I totally thought he was going to screw it up. So
it's not completely stupid.
Yeah.
But no, I really enjoy that scene, and I think it's really necessary with all the horrible stuff that's happening. And it's really important to like continue to humanize Marta and like show her similarities to Lymond in a way that wins the sympathy of the reader and of Jarrett. And then I love the ending where she's really hot under all the clothes. And she says, if you say I look hot again, I shall die of boredom. And Lymond says, don't die, have a fit. Meaning tear off all your clothes if you're hot.
I was reading this while I was at work 2 or 3 days ago, and I literally just laughed out loud in the middle of a very quiet room in the middle of this, and had a bunch of people sort of look at me, and that's like, oh well.
Hope the camera wasn't on.
No, we weren't holding, so.
Yeah, and we do get this little bit of information where the sister has gone off on this ship, the Peppercorn, and we find out that Marta knows what its trade route is, and so there's hope that the boy is not lost. They can trace him on the ship. So they're headed to, where are they going? They're headed to Aleppo, I think, by way of pretending to go to Jerusalem with all these Spanish soldiers that are with them.
So yeah, Marta says that she knows the route of the Peppercorn and that the Peppercorn is going to Scanderoon, which is the port for Aleppo. Mm-hmm. That's where they're trying to go.
Yeah. But they have to sort of pretend they're going
to Jerusalem, yeah.
Jerusalem, because they've got this escort of soldiers. Yeah. And Jarrett is not doing well. So Lymond makes the choice to turn aside and go to this. Like, it seems like he's like makes this sudden choice. Jarrett's not doing well, so he's going to go to this town, Gabes. Gabes. I don't know. And they fall into yet another trap. This time of the Aga Morat, and all the soldiers die, and my reading of it is that Lymond gets them out of it by sleeping with this man, and then they end up at Dragout's house. So it was pretty dark scene where Lymond is basically trading away his body for their freedom. So.
Nothing he hasn't done in the past. Using his body and sex to, curry favors and such.
I don't think he's done it in such an explicitly not just transactional, but like in such a skewed power dynamic. Like, the power of this guy basically is like, I will kill your friends unless you sleep with me. Whereas in Queen's Play, it was much more like, I want to get information, so I'm just going to screw around with all these people that I'm not really into necessarily. This one is much more abusive and much more like creepy and horrible and like non-consensual. Like it's a threat. It's, I will kill your friends if you don't sleep with me.
Yeah, he has much less agency in this situation than he did in Queen's Play. And it just feels more, I mean, Lymond has such a history of abuse as well. And we don't know like the sexual abuse that he suffered when he was enslaved, but there was most likely some, if not a lot. And so just this lack of power and lack of agency, the amount of PTSD that this guy has got to have is just horrific.
So I think it's also important and interesting to point out that this all happens because Lymond is trying to protect Jarrett. He goes to this town specifically because he's worried about Jarrett, which is where they get caught. And then if we break down the conversation with the Aga Morat, like first he threatens Marta by saying the lady is fair, and then Lymond defends her and says she's the special care of Henri of France. And then he talks about, he reveals early he knows Jarrett was a knight of St. John, which is the enemy of the Turks. And then he says, it is suggested that I take you all three in custody to Dragout Rice's castle. But there's 4 of them, there's not 3 of them. So the one he's threatening is Jarrett, because Marta's protected. Salablanca is like a servant, so he's less likely to threaten him. But Jarrett, as a knight, is not protected by Henri of France. And Lymond does this whole negotiation. And then at the end, Lymond says, it is written before God that after this hour we depart all 4 in good health to Jerba. And the Aga agrees, and then they go off. So it's explicitly Jarrett who is threatened, and Jarrett that Lymond does this to protect. And Jarrett, of course, has no idea because 1, he's really sick, and 2, he's Jarrett. He's very naive.
And he doesn't realize that any of this is happening at all.
Yeah, he has no clue.
No, even if he was in good health, I don't think he'd pick up on it though.
He didn't even know he was in a whorehouse until the kid like came onto him. And then, so on that point also, there's the parallel of father and son as like selling their bodies both.
Yeah. Or not even selling, like there's no, it's just being forced.
Yeah, I mean, like arguably selling in exchange for his friend's life, right?
Yeah.
Used and forced and yeah. So then they end up at Dragout's house, which is beautiful and inescapable.
So I think there's some other interesting things that happen in the previous section before we move on. One of them is the fact that Lymond lets their Spanish escort die. And Garrett thinks he won't, but he does. And I think it's interesting. He sort of didn't have any other option.
Could he have I didn't.
He barely manages to save Jared. You know, how would he save Spanish?
Save them?
I don't think he could have, but it's another example of the lack of sentimentality. Like, he's not going to die to save these Spaniards, even though the Spaniards are escorting him, like, specifically to keep them safe. And it was like an offer made by the governor to protect them. And these people are friendly to them. Lymond still lets them die without even trying to save them because, and you can argue because of that lack of sentimentality, there's no way he can save them. The only thing he can do is go make nice with the Agamora to win him over and try to save Jared and Marta in Salablanca.
I think he's kind of backed into a wall. There's really nothing he could have done.
Yeah. And then we have the moment where Jared and Marta both think they're about to die. And Jared says, "Though I can't help you, I shall still pray for you. Who are you, Marta?" Parallels that moment where Lymond and her had that really intense conversation where she convinced him to let her stay. And he said, "Who are you?" So this recurring theme of like, who is Marta?
Yeah, and then I love that she says, why ask now? Do you expect to live to gratify Mr. Crawford's curiosity? So her assumption is that he's asking on behalf of Lymond as opposed to asking on behalf of himself, which I think he's genuinely, like, he's curious. He wants to know who she is. And then he replies, "No, you said that the world was well rid of you both. I cannot believe it." I like that he's like, "No, you're like, both you and Lymond are worth living."
Yeah. Well, and it's she's really brave. She's got this little knife and she like actually fights to protect herself, although of course she gets overpowered. And two, she is very similar to Lymond in her lack of self-regard. And she's basically saying that both her and Lymond don't deserve to live, and sort of points out, who would, all the people they've hurt, right? Una O'Dwyer and the branded baby and the woman Ketty and the 20 soldiers and the infant Catamite. Don't you think they would all have been happier if Francis Crawford had never existed? So this antipathy toward Lymond, but also toward herself.
Yeah, and then she says, and when he asks, "What can you know of him?" and she says, "All I know of myself, too much and nothing," which is interesting. That if we apply that to both of them, she knows too much and nothing of Crawford, and she knows too much and nothing of herself.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, remember she said before she doesn't know who her father is? I don't know if we believe her, but similar implication here that she really doesn't know. I think also it's really telling that Lymond is pretending to be at ease in his like making nice with the Agamora. So like Jared and Marta get there and Lymond's like lounging, and of course Jared thinks he's actually lounging when he's trying to make nice with this guy to keep his friends alive.
It even says Jared distinguished a note in that level voice he'd not heard before, and you're like, yeah.
Well, right, and it says right afterward. Looking up straining, however, he could detect no bodily signs of fatigue or unendurable stress. So whatever the note was, it's of fatigue and stress, but he's not, like, it's just coming through in his voice. He's not showing it in his physical form, but that's because he's acting really hard. Yeah. Which tells us that even though Lymond does this, like, yes, I will sleep with you to save my friends. It's totally fine. It's not fine. He's really, really upset. And I don't know if you guys caught it, but in the next scene, there's a reference to Lymon's hair having gotten long, and then in the next scene he's cut his hair short.
Yeah.
Which is like a classic trope when somebody gets like raped or has a non-consensual sexual experience to cut their hair. So probably the guy was like creeping on his hair. Oh, so creepy.
Yeah. Like if I mean, not to get gross, but like if he was holding Lymond by his hair or, you know, pulling his hair and all that, like I can see he just no.
So sad. So horrible.
Of course, Jarrett is oblivious. Not that he would know that, but it's just like, oh, you cut your hair.
And there's also these descriptions of Lymond like not being able to look at Jarrett and Marta, and then like writing afterward by himself because he can't look at them, and like clearly he is super traumatized. And Marta probably knows exactly what's going on because she's very perceptive, but Jarrett is lost.
Yeah.
Just the irony, Jarrett is clueless and it's all done to protect him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it says like when it says Marta turns to look at Jarrett, and it says, although her extreme pallor had gone, there was about her an odd hint of tension and violence, which was not to be wondered at. And you can just see her, you know, holding in this anger of what has happened to Lymond. Like, even if she doesn't like Lymond all that much, like, that I think you're right. Like, she does know what happened and has this inner violence.
Yeah, and I don't know if we're given evidence that she's upset about what's happened to Lymond, but she's definitely upset about the situation that they're in. She's definitely upset about something.
I mean, I hope she is. Like, if she does understand what's happened to Lymond, I feel like even if you don't like someone very much, or they make you uncomfortable, or their existence means something for your existence that you don't like even if those things are true, like if you know that someone has just experienced sexual trauma to save you, surely she's got some emotional response to that. Like, I hope. I don't know. Yeah. So they are at Dragout's house.
And we get our big reveal. Kiaya Hatun is Guzel, Dragout Rais's mistress.
Yep.
It was a surprise. I was not even remotely expecting that. So
yes, that was a huge surprise.
I love that this woman in the 1500s can I travel to France, I go everywhere.
Like, she has got, I am so intrigued with her. Like, what is the power structure that she is living in is just fascinating to me. What does she command and how does she command it is super interesting.
Yeah. And she's the one who is holding them there, even though clearly they are indeed part of a French embassy, which is allied with Dragout, but she's like, nope, I'm gonna hold you here until he arrives.
Yeah.
Well, and she's got to have a lot of information about Una and the baby too, because she was with them for a long period of time. So
yeah, she was there when Una was giving birth.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think is going on with her? What is her motivations and goals?
I mean, I'm predisposed to like her because she seemed to have compassion for the baby and was treating Una fairly well. And it seemed that when we saw her last, it seemed like she was, I don't know, acting as a decent person, but she also has motivations that we have no clue about. Like, we don't know, why is she doing this and what's in it for her? Is she trying to manipulate something or protect something, or I have no idea. So
something I thought about after that reveal is that she was there in the room with the Dame de Dutances when she gave Philippa her prophecy to go to Greek. So it may not actually be a prophecy. Guzel may know exactly where the child is and sent Philippa to find him through the use of prophecy. So.
And also, why does she care? Like,
Yeah.
like
I don't
just
know.
to go to the core of the thing, like, why did she go to France? Like, why does she care about any of this? You know, what is the heart of all of this for her is something that I feel like we just don't know.
Mhm.
Yeah, we still don't really know what the Dame de Dutance's motivation is either.
Or Dragout, like, what is the role that he's playing in all of this, other than Gabriel sent him Una and or arranged that. But did Gabriel arrange that, or did Dragout sort of manipulate that? And does he have another purpose? Like, what is his? I don't want to assume that his interests line up with Gabriel's.
Well, he kept Lymond alive when he could have been killed. So
I think anything happening in Dragout's house while he's away is Gabriel's doing, and not really anything having to do with Dragout and his orders. So I don't know. I'd like to think Dragout has good intentions, but I don't know enough yet. So
Yeah. Like, I want to think the same. Like, I want to think that he is somehow an ally of Lymond's, at least in the sense that in ways that if it doesn't cause him trouble, he's more, like, maybe he won't go out of his way for Lymond all that much, but if it doesn't cause him too much trouble, like, maybe he'll be on Lymond's side for things. Like, that's what I want to think is happening, but I don't know.
and he did warn him against Gabriel in the last book, and that talk in the garden they had.
Yeah.
So how do you think this is going to turn out? What is Kiaya Hatun's motivation? How are they going to get out of Jerva? What's going to happen?
I mean, maybe they're at her mercy, so maybe she'll take them to Dragout. Who knows? Are we gonna, like, what's going on with Philippe and Archie? Like, are we headed back to them?
Yeah, I definitely want to see from that side what's happening.
Yeah, and what is her game? I have no clue. Yeah.
Anything you're hoping will happen?
Just want to reiterate that I really would like to see more from Salablanca's point of view. I hope we get something. So,
and I really want to see more of Dragout. I want to see more of Kaya.
Kiaya Hatun?
Yeah, Katoon. Yeah. I really am hoping that these characters become more fully fleshed out characters, like, as we get into this rest of the book, that I'm hoping that we stop introducing, like, random Middle Eastern person, because, like, so far we've had, like, this Middle Eastern guy and this Middle Eastern guy, you're like, this North African person, and we just have them for, like, a scene, like, there's the camel trader, and then there's the Aga Marat, and then there's, like, and there's the governor, and so it's like, I hoping we're getting to a point where we're going to have some characters that we get to stay with for a while, and we get to know, like, who are these people and why are they doing this, and what what is their motivation, and I want to learn some of that. So,
well, and except for the random characters in a position of power we've come across, all of the other ones have basically ended up dead because of it. So
yeah. Well, it also sort of makes sense with the structure of the plot. Like, they're on a quest and Gabriel's setting it up so, like, all these people play a part and then die.
Yeah, it's true.
Gabriel. And we haven't even seen Gabriel yet in this book.
which I'm fine.
Manipulating everything.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I want us to see him at some point in the book. I mean, it would be ridiculous if we didn't, but I really don't want to see him. Like, that sounds terrible. But I'm like, I just don't want to see him. He's so horrible.
It's inevitable that he'll pop up at some point. But
I mean, it would be super weird if we get to the end of the book and he never shows up. But
I mean, we talked last time, he's such a good villain, you can't get rid of him. So
yeah, but he's got to make an appearance at some point, especially since the quest is to get this pawn away from him. So,
I mean, maybe the book will end up with them actually finding the kid, but never having confronted Gabriel, and then the next book will be all about Gabriel, and, like, maybe, I don't know. We do have 2 more after this, so
yeah, it's true.
We are more than halfway through.
Ah, whoa. Crazy.
Yeah. All right. Any final thoughts you guys want to share?
No, I want to go back to Philippa. I just really want this baby to be okay. I think part of the reason I want the kid in this, the kid we just met, to not be Karenin is because I don't want this to be happening to Karenin. So part of it is just me going like, oh, maybe it's not him.
Even if it's not him, it's still an innocent child that this is happening to.
Yeah. So it's still, yeah, so bad. So I want to rescue all the children.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Bye.